Sure. Okay. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. So, I want to say that, we're calling this an interview, but, I want to be clear. This is the candidate forum, and I'm the only candidate that showed up. And, I had a crazy day too. I'm a mother. I work full time. So does my husband. My youngest is nonverbal and intellectually disabled, and he was up at 4 a.m. this morning because that's something that's very common with kids with this profile. And then his staff, his one-to-one staff at school, was sick. So at 7:30, my entire morning was thrown up, and my husband's looking at his calendar, and I'm looking at my calendar, and then insert chaos for the rest of the day. So I just want to be clear that I still managed to get dinner made, kids in the bath. I'm here. That's called commitment, and that has been a commitment I have displayed in this district for the last 7 years. I was on the reopening committee, 70, 80 hours of work. I was on the the superintendent hiring committee. That was what, 5 Saturdays, including getting prepared for it and reviewing all the resumes and then writing questions and feedback. I was also on I'm on the strategic planning right now, and that has homework before and after. So I want to say first and foremost that the reason I am here with you today, putting myself in a very vulnerable position, right? Because it's easy to have one-on-one conversations with people. It's easy because you can sense how they're feeling about things, you can change your stance on things given how they respond. It's not easy to put yourself out there to a large group like this on a social media forum to be, criticized. But that's what I'm doing because I'm transparent and I'm committed. And as a 22-year educator, including that I taught in the state of California for 12 years, I bring a very diverse expertise to the table. I know how schools work. I've seen schools in other states, not just this state, and I currently have a job where I work across the whole state. So I think I have the ability to say, you know, we can get out of the provincial mindset of how we've done things here, and we can think about doing things a little differently. In addition, I'm the mother of two children with learning differences. Like I said, one is pretty significant. And I think it's that gives me a unique lens into decisions that we make at the more global level. And I think that I can do a lot for inclusion, and not just for students that are differently abled or that have IEPs, but also for LGBTQ, different socioeconomic status. I think that we could do a lot more work in this community with inclusion. So I'm here today asking for your support. I've done so much work, and what I need is for you to go to early voting at town hall. It's open from Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. And I need you to vote for me. Signs don't win elections, votes do. So either vote early at town hall, early in person, or on October 5th at Swift Community Center, and that is one polling place. Thank you. Yes. So I put out an op-ed. So just so you know, if you'd like to know a little bit more in detail, you can also read that. It's on EG News and also on the Pendulum. But, generally speaking, I believe that we need to follow the CDC guidelines. I mean, I'm not a doctor. No school committee member is a doctor. The superintendent is not a doctor. So to leave these decisions to the local entities is to say we need to follow the guidance of the organizations that do that work for a living. And right now, the recommendation is to wear masks. And therefore, that is how I feel right now. As far as vaccinations, both of them, well, my older child is vaccinated, my husband and I are vaccinated, and I'm like chomping at the bit to get my youngest vaccinated because he's high risk and I have not been able to get him, I've not been able to make him eligible for that. And I really need that soon. So I believe in vaccinations. I think they're important. They're important for also preventing the spread in the community. So I think it's about protecting others. And, I think that the last thing I want to say is, my youngest is, he learned remotely all last year because it was unsafe for him to be in the school building. And this year I'm sending him, and he is high risk. and he cannot socially distance, and he doesn't wear a mask super well because he's intellectually disabled. I want you to imagine a 2-year old. His thinking is developmentally too. Um, and I give that example because I think it's I think it's easy for people to only think about their own children, and not that that's not important, but it's easy to forget there are more vulnerable members in our community, including staff. There are staff members that are vulnerable too, and that school committees don't get to make a decision based only on what they think personally for their children. Okay. So I have to make a decision if I am a school committee member based on what's right for the entire community. And I have to think about children and staff members that you don't know. And I support the decision to mask at this time, and I encourage everyone to vaccinate. Well, before I even declared candidacy, I contacted the Ethics Commission and I said all of that. I didn't just say he was a teacher, I said he's the vice president of the union, but he is a teacher and a great teacher, by the way. And they told me that it didn't have any issue other than when we vote on the actual contract, I'd have to recuse myself. And if there was ever any personnel matter that was specifically about my husband, I'd have to recuse myself. But really, that isn't going to happen. It's only going to be the contract. Now, on that matter, I'd like to say something. First of all, they're actually, let me back up. Teachers are not the enemy, you know unions, organized labor, our teachers and our educators are the lifeblood of this system. So, let's be real. This question is cloaked in the idea that there's some conspiracy that union. I disagree with that. I think that the educators want what's best, and that we're working together in negotiations, right? So, next thing I would like to say is that the way the negotiations process goes, and I think there's a lot of people that don't know this, so I really want to explain it. The way it goes is the school committee selects representatives. Okay. The entire school committee does not negotiate the contract. It's usually a member or probably 2 to 3. Okay. So we already have 2 to 3 members that are interested in doing it. So the fact that I wouldn't be able to be involved is not a problem. Okay. They negotiate with the union. Obviously, my husband would have to check with the board of ethics, and I'm assuming I don't think he would be allowed to, but there was other people that are active in the union. He doesn't have to. Then in a closed space with the, given the, what's the word? The power of these two groups to work in a room on their own, and they kind of go back and forth, back and forth. And what ends up coming to the school committee, where I would actually be a part of a vote, is an already worked out deal. Like they have already come to a conclusion by the time it comes to the school committee, and I would need to recuse myself. So we have 7 members that would be voting on a contract that already fell in the parameters we were trying to work on and that the teachers already agree to. And I would need to recuse myself. But there's still 6 school committee members voting. And even if I were to say I can vote, which I can't at this moment, and I say no, I am unlikely to change the outcome of that. So, I think you have to ask yourself, what does that really impact? I don't think it impacts anything. And historically, 3 school committee members, 2 of which had children that were teachers in the district, and actually did vote on the contract. And I think that might be something that changed recently with the Board of Ethics. I think that I've heard, I'm not positive, but I've heard that the 2 previous school committee members, because the contract isn't about your spouse or child specifically, it's about a class of 300 people, they were allowed to vote. And that change that you need to recuse yourself on the vote was a relatively recent one. So again, there were 3 other members, and I believe one of them was our longest standing ever school committee member, and she served for a long time and did a great job. You're welcome. Okay. Well, I think that's a fair it's a fair impression because the roles that I've had that have been publicly available. Hi, James. Hi, James. Do you need to pause? I understand very much. It was kind of like it was like, planned. No. So I think, I think it's a fair question because the roles that I have played in this district were mostly in a leadership realm, were very tightly aligned to my chair position, elected position for the Special Education Advisory Committee. So, a lot of times when I was speaking vocally, I was the school committee liaison or I was presenting at the school committee of the feedback and the data and the desires of the families that I was representing. So I think that's a fair question. And of course, my two children are different, which gives me a different experience of this school district than others. It is not all I have to offer. I encourage you all to go look at my resume. It's on LinkedIn. It's very open. I have been a career educator for 22 years. In California, I taught high school English, English language development to students that were new to the country. I taught special education, which included high school math and study skills in transition. And I taught in the classroom for 12 years, while I also held a variety of leadership positions. So I've been a department chair, I've been a school accreditation chair, and then in Rhode Island, I held two district roles, and in addition to being a consultant across the state, and none of that is specific to special ed. Well, except for the teaching special ed position. But all the rest of that is really about meeting the needs of all learners, including diverse students like multilingual learners and students with disabilities. And I think it's a lens that I would say the opposite. I think it's a lens we very much need on the school committee, and I'm here to offer that. Well, I would say that the feedback we gave, so as part of the recent strategic planning process, and they wanted to organize the strategic plan around the vision of a graduate, knowledgeable, connected, reflective, and I forgot what the fourth one is. It's another C one, but I can't remember. But anyway, the point is I brought it back to the SEAC. We engaged our community. We also sent out a survey because another thing that I'm really passionate about is making sure it's not only the people who have the privilege of coming to meetings that get feedback, okay? Because there are real reasons people can't come to meetings. So we sent out a survey, we brought it back. And so some of the main themes that we saw, like we asked the parents, if this vision would be true for your child who has an IEP, what would have to change in this district? And I'm not going to lie, it was kind of surprising to me that most of the feedback had to do with general education. It didn't have to do specifically with special education. It said our children are spend all day in school with other people who aren't trained to know anything about their disability. They might not be trained on what their role is in the IEP, that things in the IEP are not necessarily like optional. They're things that are actually like agreed to because the child needs them. So we wanted more training for general education teachers. We wanted more training for general education administrators like principals on what is their role. And then universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is, how in architecture, when they wanted to make, instead of making buildings handicap accessible after the fact, which is very expensive and difficult, they started universally designing, where they said any new building that we design, we are going to make it accessible for blind, for people in a wheelchair, for etc., from the get-go universally, so that we don't have to retrofit. And the same thing, the same philosophy is being applied to education, where they say when you do your lesson design, when you implement your curriculum, you should already be thinking about, I have kids in my class that have dyslexia, and this text might be challenging for them. I have kids in my class that have behavioral regulation challenges. How can I think about making this lesson more active, involving more movement, having more self regulation built in? I have kids. that might be struggling with foundational math skills. How can I make sure that I'm scaffolding that and those kinds of things? And by doing that, it's actually a framework. It's a very nice framework. And so, if we were to build up the skill set of more people in the district, learning would be better for all kids. Many of the children I just described, many of the kids who would benefit from what I just described, don't even have IEPs, right? It just means a more inclusive way of teaching, right? Like rather than lecture, and all talk, we'd have video, we'd have visual supports. So anyway, I can go on and on, but that generally speaking, those are the things that I would be saying are really priorities. It's a good question. Um, so I think that, well, first thing I would say is to actually make diversity more welcome. And I think that goes to our housing plans and this is why it's really interesting to be a school committee candidate, but the systems are very intertwined, right? So decisions town council and their committees make affects the school system too, right? So first thing I would say is I'd like to make housing more accessible. And I think that then we would have more diversity in general, and diversity in my world is a good thing. Southern California's got to be one of the most diverse places in this country, and that's where I spent 12 years. And teaching students that were new to the country was one of the most amazing experiences of my career. So anyway, we should be more welcoming and not have those undertones of, ooh, we don't want to have any more of that going on. That needs to stop. But the next thing I would say is, in the school systems, right? So if you're not going to have more diverse people by definition, then making sure that all students can see themselves reflected in school, right? Just like, recently we've called attention to the fact that movies seem to always have white, blonde or brunette women, and that's it, or white men. And recently they've started diversifying that. Same thing with diversity. And I would expand diversity to say not just race, although race is definitely something that we need to think about. I would also say LGBTQ. I would say differently abled. So some of the things we're talking about is when we look at curriculum, right? We're adopting and buying a lot of curriculum for the high quality curriculum mandate through RIDE, which we have a few years to get in compliance for that. And when we're looking at these various curricula, we have to say to ourselves, can all of our students see themselves reflected in this history, in these pieces of literature, in the images in the book? And that's like an important first step. Another step would be diversifying our staffs, right? Does the racial, sexual orientation, ableist makeup of this community, does the staff reflect that? And, I think it's just another example of, I'm not saying that like you have to be real rigid about it, but having that lens all the time to just think about it a little bit further. We really want kids to say, I see myself reflected here. And it's better if they see other peers where they're reflected. But if they don't, we can have clubs, we can have literature, we can have history, um, we can think about staffing and how we consider those elements in our hiring. So those are just some of the ways. I just think, we need to make sure everyone feels welcome and everyone feels reflected, not that they are the outsider coming in. Like immediately post COVID, like right now. If this is post COVID. Okay. Well, at this moment I agree with you that I don't think COVID is gone. I'm hoping for I'm really expecting that we're still going to have a full in person year, because I do think that we've gotten enough out of the crisis mode that I think that, we might have quarantines and we might have spikes, but I do think that I think we're going to maintain the face to face, which is wonderful. I think the biggest well, there's lots of challenges, but I think the biggest challenge really is going to be not to let COVID dominate everything we do. We still have a school system that I believe is good but can do better. And we still have a lot of the same needs we had before. In fact, COVID made them more pronounced to a degree. And so I think staying focused and not letting all those COVID fires distract us is one message. And then two, COVID brought up a lot of opportunities that I think we need to tap into and think about. And first one being the funds from the American Rescue Plan, which is federal funds for stimulus for the COVID recovery, and ESSER funds. And those funds are going to come into our district for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think I really, really am hoping that a big challenge, but a positive challenge, is going to be thinking about how to meaningfully use those funds for long term thoughts, not let's buy this because it's a new sexy fad. Like, I'm looking for something that is really like, we can't buy something recurring, we can't add personnel because that's going to make for a cost that we can't sustain. But I'm looking for innovation. So, COVID is providing us some nice opportunities to attack long-term issues we've always had. And then second of all, COVID did demonstrate some creative differences in how we did things. And I know I've said this before, and I apologize because some people have heard it more than once, but I don't know. I feel like everybody's like, let's get back to normal. And I'm like, hey, normal wasn't perfect. Can we, before we rush to get back to normal, can we stop and say, like, what did we learn from this? Because we did learn some things. I mean, I too, in my job, and I'm sure everybody listening, I had to completely pivot everything I do too. And I have to say, some really cool stuff came out of it. First of all, adults learn via blended learning really well. And we have found a way to connect educators, in the work that I do. Sorry, I just jumped into my work hat. We have found ways to connect educators across districts and even across states in ways that we hadn't before. And so I just want to say, let us get past the trauma, let us recover a little bit, but then ask ourselves, like, what did we learn that we can build upon, and maybe not make it a crisis that forces it in an explosion? Because those would be the things I would say. So it's really, the challenge is staying focused on the long term and improvement, but there are a lot of opportunities that this brought up too. Yeah. So, not not to be critical of anybody who has led school committee, because I don't I don't feel prepared for that job. And sometimes when you're giving feedback, it feels like you're criticizing people, and that's definitely not what I'm doing. Because I know that I too will fall prey to the fire of the moment, especially when the community is very amped up about something. Okay, so what I would say is this: it is true that school committee time, just like educators, time is our greatest commodity. We really need to make sure that our time is spent on what our priorities are, and that other elements of managerial operations, they are not our job. And I just recently heard the school committee, just this last meeting, talking about it. So I feel like they're already, without the new candidate coming on, they're already thinking about reorganizing. But I really think that we really need to stay tied to teaching and learning. And even in my own work, we have these norms where we're like, don't bring something to a meeting that doesn't require everyone's input, because then it could have been a memo. Okay. So I think getting into the habit of saying, what is our district about with teaching and learning? And you would hope that the strategic plan is going to represent our long term plan for teaching and learning. And unlike last time, I would really want to see metrics and what we have done coming back to school committee on the regular, and also community feedback of, are we seeing it have the impact that it has intended? And I would love to see things that are just updates that really could have been memos, or they were already in the superintendent's newsletter anyway. And let's be real, if you're on school committee, you read that memo. It's not like you ignore it. I'd like to see things that are updates happen less. I'd like to see metrics. I'd like to see implementation. I'd like to see surveys and feedback. Um, and I feel like I had one more thing to say and I lost it. Oh, and then we just have to be careful for those notorious time consumers like calendar. Ugh, I've had many a meeting where I've been frustrated with the calendar conversation. It's like, is it about teaching and learning? Not the conversations we're having. The conversations we're having are about people's vacations, which is great. Go have that conversation, but not here. Like, this is not the place for it. And as far as innovation, I mean, I think that's a hard question because the role of a school committee is, it's to meet the unmet needs that the community reports, and it's to improve the district using levers like policy and collaboration with the school committee, and do the budget and the contract and the hiring. And innovation is usually closer to the practice level. So I think that school committee could be a part of that. I'm not sure I see school committee being the driving force. What I hope that we can do is, when those teaching and learning pieces come up and we're having real conversation with them, I hope that each one of us is going to offer our lens that we were elected to provide, and that will be some of the innovation, that we're asking the right questions and that we're bringing up the right things. And, I mean, I think it's our educators and our administrators that innovate. I would love to pursue this. I mean, it's definitely like, if you asked me, if there is innovation at my level, like if I was in the school committee, I would say an innovation I really want to see is, again, remember how I was saying earlier that every student should see themselves reflected in our school system, right? Be it race, be it sexual orientation, be it ability. Well, I'll give an example recently that I had a friend who went to the high school open house, or, welcome night, and she brought her daughter, who has learning differences, and they're somewhat significant. And she said that the entire presentation was all national honor students talking about Ivy League colleges, right? And so even when they did their breakouts, she was like, Mom, where do I go? Like, where, you know there's no students here talking that are like me. I guess I'm going to college too. And then, and which is fine if that's what she wants, but like, she was not feeling herself reflected and included in the planning that was taking place. So with regards to New England Tech, I think it's the same thing. We are a district who has missed the boat. We are one of only two districts in the entire state who do not have any career and technical programming. We don't have any CTE programs. And not only do we lose money with people not coming in, we are losing money because we have to transport kids out who go other places. Now that's a good example of something I have not seen brought to the school committee, and it's a question that should be asked. I should say, Superintendent Meyer, I would really like to know numbers. How many kids are leaving the district to go to a career and technical program, and how many of those are we providing transportation for, and to what cost, right? So those numbers are not brought to the school committee, and we're missing the boat, and we have an asset right in our community that I believe we could definitely come up with something for. But why it doesn't happen, I just don't know. I mean, I feel like everything, any major change of that nature really requires a lot of leadership focus. I feel like we've had a lot of transitions. I mean, I've been here 10 years and we've had, I think, three special ed directors, two superintendents. We had no teaching and learning. Then for a year and a half, we had one. Then we suddenly had an assistant soup, no teaching and learning. We need to stop with the, oh, and don't even get started with business and HR. I mean, it's been a revolving door. For us to really put the meaningful time and energy into a quality program, we would have to find a niche that we believe there is an audience for that would come here. We'd have to plan and collaborate with New England Tech. We'd likely need the support of other community members. Then we'd have to actually build and create the program, and then marketing. And these might even also be new roles to a degree. And I think sometimes they require funding up front just to get things rolling, and then they will pay off in the future. Now, I'm gonna wrap up by saying that's a great idea for the use of ESSER and the American Rescue Funds money that we're going to be getting for our COVID stimulus. That's the kind of thing I mean when I say we have to be very careful not to fall for fads when we spend that money. The vendors are swarming trying to sell educators things. We need to say, what is something we've always wanted to do and didn't have the time or funds to get it off the ground? That's one.